What's going on, guys? Reisshub back with another video, and in today's video I want to put all of the best FNCS tips that I've done from my every single region winner together into one video. Now this is just kind of a bit of a recap throughout the 4 FNCS that was during this year. I'm not covering squads because I didn't actually do any content on that. I wish I was making content on that piece, but I was not. So this will just be from all of the 4 every region videos that I've done so far. So here are the best tips. Let's get into it. So next up is Asia, which was won by Ryle, and I'm sorry I can't pronounce your name, but I'm just going to call you WR. They won with 60 points and 1 victory royale. This team dropped Weeping Woods in all 6 of their games and were completely uncontested every game. Fishing was a huge part of their endgame playstyle, rotating past agency to fish the spots if there wasn't enough in the river near Weeping. Since they didn't have a launch pad from a vault, they really focused on getting supply drops, committing a lot of mats at times to get these. Next up is EU, which was won by Nate and Andalex. They got a total of 53 points and 1 victory royale. They landed to the east side of Sweaty Sands and were contested for the first 4 games. Initially they weren't interested in fighting off spawn and just wanted to tag them for Storm Surge damage. However, after Andalex died to Storm Surge in game 1, they decided to fight off spawn to ensure they were above the threshold. The contesting team ended up not landing there the next 2 games as they'd been bullied out. Next up is North America East, and this was won by no other than Zayt and Saf, which shouldn't really come as a shock to anyone else at this point. They ended with 54 points with 1 victory royale. Most games they rotated to the north side of the map to rotate, ensuring they were on the dead side. This often gets them super free rotates into further zones. They typically rotate early into 4th zone to get positioned reasonably high. They rotate to 5th early, often staying low but creating horizontal space instead of vertical. If they need to pad to 5th zone, they pad when the zone starts moving, attempting to land on the dead side of 5th zone. Because of this, when zone pulls north, look how free the east side zone is where Zay is. Another great dead side rotate play was in game 5, when they stay back in zone to launch to the 6th zone. Sitting in storm for 5 ticks, they both use floppers and then use the pad, landing to the west side of the zone, which is the dead side. This is by far one of the cleanest rotates I've ever seen endgame. They both love to sit in cones in the endgame when low on materials, which is a strategy I've seen less and less in Chapter 2. Zayt does this later on when he has 5 builds, which secures him in elimination and ends up clutching them into the top 10 placement. When they're tunneling endgame, they switch who tunnels. When one runs low on materials, the other takes over. They also tend to full tarp more than poverty ramp tarp. To take height in their final game, they made an absolutely textbook play. By getting ahead of zone, then Saf pressures height with the RPG while Zayt cranks and secures it. This wins them the game and secures the win for the entire tournament. First up, we have Middle East, and our winner there was ASMR Toby, who won with 362 points. He got 162 points on day 1 and 200 on day 2. Toby has 6k earnings before this tournament, added another 6k to that, and he placed 10th in week 1 of the Invitational. He hasn't made grand finals of any FNCS before this, and actually qualified becoming 2nd in the open qualifiers. He landed at the house at the very west of the map near the Stack Shack, looted up there and popped any minis that he got. He doesn't use any of his half pots, as his next rotation is over to the Slurp Truck. After that, he moves over to the Fancy View house to finish looting there. Ensuring he's farmed enough materials, he rotates back to his drop spot to upgrade his shotgun. He then rotates over to Holly and sneaks onto the roofs looking for beams on other players. After 2 or 3 shots from a controller AR, he either ramp faces into their opponent's box or wall replaces and peanut butter peeks from a ramp to finish the opponent off quickly. Toby rotates early to 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th zones, sitting on the edge in the earlier zones and getting as far ahead as possible in the 6th zone. When rotating to 5th zone, he has a tendency to do this by foot. There was a game on day 1 where he had 2 launch pads and got near max distance 5th zone and still decided to go by foot. Potentially this is because he doesn't want to get beamed out of the sky and knows he'll be able to get a refresh as he's so good at getting these in the moving zones. Next up we have OCE, which was won by Volks with an astonishing 490 points. He had 246 points in day 1 and 244 points in day 2. Volks has 117k earnings, including 50k from the World Cup duos, and he's 2nd in the power rankings in OCE. He placed 2nd in week 1 and qualified for trios, squads and duos FNCS, which automatically qualified him here for the Invitational. Volks drops Lazy Lake and lands on the roof of No Sweat Insurance building. Once he has looted there, he loots the 2 chests in the courtyard and then the main building. What he did after this varied, but often he pushed over to the southeast building to continue looting or upgraded his pump and then fished in the lake to the west. The most notable part of Volk's strategy comes from his material efficiency, which shows throughout the entire game. Off spawn, he always ensures that he has sufficient materials prior to rotating. In the second and third zones, he always rotates here early and then opts to replace a structure out to replenish his materials, rather than solely focusing on a high ground position. He even sits in wood boxes occasionally because he knows he can refarm this easily. Originally, I was questioning a lot of his 4th and 5th zone rotates, however he seems to rotate through the congested side of the zone very frequently, in contrast to many players who rotate around the dead side. It became apparent to me that he does this so that he can rotate through and around enemy builds to save materials. Once in 4th and 5th zone, he doesn't focus on getting a high ground layer like many other players, he simply sits edge on a low ground layer in a box to conserve his materials. He rotates to 5th by foot, even if he has a launch pad, as he tries to conserve that for the first moving zones. When he does use a launch pad, he doesn't do so immediately as soon as the zone starts to move. He tunnels into zone for a bit first, then pads so that he can land into the 6th zone, choosing a low ground layer to land on. Like I've already said, Volks is an absolute master at conserving materials, and he does this in the moving zones by getting ahead and focus on using old builds to work through. On this 6th zone rotate, he managed to only use 250 wood alone and get safely into the zone. And then he does the same on the 7th zone, barely using any materials and taking 0 damage. He had 555 materials at 5th zone, now 2 full zones later, he still has 200, 400, 500. However, the downfall of this playstyle is when you get behind on the moving zones. This way you get stuck in enemy builds with a bunch of other players around, and it's easy to get eliminated this way. Next up we have Any East, that was won by SF Roller. He got 163 points on day 1 and 174 on day 2. His win was a bit controversial as he only had 3.2k earnings and the majority of that was being on console. He got 29th in week 1 and qualified for the tournament by placing 48th in the duo grand finals on console. So what was his playstyle? Basically, it was the definition of a controller playstyle. Jumping into boxes with an AR or SMG, lasering down his opponents before they had a chance to breathe. If you play controller and you're not picking up an SMG, you really are missing out, and Roller placing first, winning 40k should be living proof of that. Last, but certainly not least, we have NA West, who was won by no other than Epic Whale, with a total of 344 points. He got 200 points on day 1 and 144 on day 2. His earnings make me reconsider my life choices, and he placed 3rd in week 1. He qualified for this tournament by coming 4th in trios, 3rd in squads, and 1st in duo grand finals. Epic dropped agency just like he did in duos, and his looting path was very similar. This obviously changed depending on how many people were contesting him, but when he was uncontested, he landed on the east roof, looting that building until he had full shield, then immediately looked up to Midas to open up the vault ASAP. When he was contested, he was extremely careful when opening the vault, blocking off every angle and even predicting an opponent to push from the west entrance once the key had been used. He was also very careful when killing Midas when contested, as sometimes he sat in a cone from the basement to ensure it was safe. Once he had looted the vault, he fished in the surrounding areas until he had 4 floppers, often taking 3 big pots over 1 or 2 slurpfish. His loot leaving here was always insane, having the mythic drum gun, AR and triple heals. He also opted to not take shotguns because who needs one when you have a drum gun and an AR. He also gets full materials agency, then sits on the roof waiting to see where the further zones are, taking tags on opponent for any storm surge that may come. The scary thing about Epic Whale is not only does he have controller aim, but he also has super clean and effective mechanics, allowing him to finish fights very quickly. He's definitely mastered controller movement too. In this clip, notice how he swerves to the right to avoid being seen by the peeking opponent before jumping straight into his box. Running into opponents' boxes really was his main method to finish up fights and stacking up those elimination points. However, the fights that he chose weren't random. He chose to do these when he needed a refresh or noticed that the opponent was weak, similar to Benji, ensuring that he had the advantage in the fight first before taking it. He gets into a high layer in the 5th zone so that he can hold players that launch and rotate in late. While rotating through the moving zones, his mechanics are very clean, using the optimal amount of materials on nearly every rotate. In game 1 of day 1, he rotated from 5th to 8th zone without taking any damage at all, which he did by ensuring he was ahead of the zone. For the Middle East region on PC, our winner here was Spy. Spy landed Catty in 5 of his games, and in the last one he decided to go retail because the previous game too many people were going Catty to W key. In the first 4 games he was only contested by 1 player, and in these 4 games he landed in the caravan and never fought the opposing player. Whoever got Kit off of spawn based on RNG got that for the rest of the game. The strategy was the same whether or not he eliminated Kit or not. He would loot the north side as quickly as possible, pop a pepper, and then rotate as fast as he could. When Kit was there, he just ensured that he eliminated her as quickly as he could and then looted the vault instantly. Then looted main, peppered, and left. This was a great strategy because it meant that he got a large amount of loot and he rotated early to set himself up in good positions for the mid game. If you're going to do this like Spy does, you need to ensure that you plan out exactly on your rotates where you're going to get your hard materials from on every zone possibility. So wherever you drop, it doesn't really matter. You just need to be able to know exactly where you're going to get your hard materials are if you have to rotate either north, south, east, or west. One of the things that I noticed about Spy that I really liked in his gameplay was he's always doing something. A large amount of players just sit in their box when they've boxed up in zone and just really do nothing. But Spy is always ensuring that he's either editing to take shots to get storm surge tags, or that he's looking through his cone to ensure that he's scouting and gaining as much information as possible. There's never any downtime in his gameplay because he's always trying to plan ahead and get as much information as possible or prepare for that endgame as well as he can. For the EU region on PC, our victor here was E11 Tayson. Tayson landed in Steamy Stacks all 6 games and landed in the main west building here. His preferred looting path was to loot this building from west to east, then leave to go and harvest the cube, grab the car park chest, harvest the boy here, get the truck, the shed, the other shed, and this looting path gives him nearly max metal and wood and 150 brick. He's also able to rotate really early from this position, which is good because Steamy is an edge map. All of the rumours about Tayson and Janet's teaming clearly are not true because they fought in 3 of the early games, and Tayson really is not afraid to take any fights at all. He generally does not fight in the mid game, but if he gets a large advantage he will push, which is very similar to Benji Fishy that we've watched in previous VOD reviews. This is generally the strategy that I recommend to the majority of players, which is to only take your fights if you've got a significant advantage over the player, maybe you've beaten them for 100 or you've cracked them already. This is the good time to take the fight, assuming your positioning on the map is okay obviously. I think the thing that stands out the most about Tayson is his fantastic game sense. This may be a relatively small example, but he's really aware of where all the campfires are, no matter what the zone is. In Game 5, he manages to pop a campfire and stoke it during moving zones. Another cool example of something really small that he did is that he heard Benji Fishy popping a big pot in the endgame and he needed a refresh. At this point, he knew the advantage because he was at 200 HP and the other player was healing, so he crash padded into the box and got an easy refresh this way. Overall, there's a lot of these small little things that Tayson does that's really impressive, and all of this game sense can only come from just playing hours and hours and hours of the actual game, rather than just playing creative. For Brazil on PC, our winner here was the one and only King. King drops in Catty Corner in all 6 of his games and lands in the gas station. He then rotates over to the fruit house, down to get a little bit of materials to the southeast of the truck here, then rotates up to the hill to get shots on the players in main and get storm surge tags this way. Then he goes and loots the vault every single game regardless if he has the card or not. He lingers in Catty for a long time even if the zone's pretty far to ensure this way he can get rotation via the peppers to farm metal and to loot the extra crash pads and heals left over in the vault. These leftover heals are super important in his gameplay. In really stacked solo games, you almost definitely can't run without double heals. Even if you take really good rotation paths, there's just too many people alive to not be shot at. So this strategy where he ensures that he has a bunch of extra heals ensures that he's going to be much less scuffed coming to the end game. And King white lines nearly every zone and sits at the edge purely because he has the Catty loot and he can afford to do this. But because he has this extra mobility, it'll get him into a bunch of fights which will also get him a lot of storm surge tags. This really isn't something you can do if you do not have this good loot though. And remember, he only takes the fight if he has an advantage. One of the interesting things that King does is the fact that he always tries to focus on using a pistol over an AR. In Game 6, even going as far as taking a gold pistol over a gold scar, and in Game 2 taking a purple pistol over a purple scar. I feel like the pistol is something that's been really underutilized this season, but because it does the 2x headshot damage and obviously uses mini ammo, it's still a super viable strategy, in particular if you have a looting path where you struggle to get AR ammo. King will not push an opponent if he doesn't get a 100% advantage off on his opponent first, and then when this player is trying to heal, he's going to continually spam them with the pistol. The purple and gold pistols have a reload time of 1.3 and 1.2 seconds, so it's really difficult for the opponent to try and heal in this time, meaning that you're going to be able to get closer if you're already at a further distance and continually apply this pressure and keep that advantage in the fight, enabling you to clean them up quickly. I would highly recommend you practice using the pistol so that you're efficient with it if you need to be. Also, since next season is going to be trios, it's actually really good to have one player running a pistol, as this allows the other 2 players to have a lot more AR ammo. So let's look into Storm Surge and how players went about getting their Storm Surge tags, because in a Grand Finals environment, this is actually probably one of the most difficult elements of the game by far. Now, I in the past and a lot of people have definitely talked about Storm Surge a little bit too simply, but in all honesty, the crucial factors are that you know where the teams around you are and where they're going to rotate depending on each zone. And that's what the majority of these winning teams have done very well. So let's take an example here where the zone is in the southwest of the map and you drop at Craggy Cliffs. If you pop the rift and land on this hill here right on Stark Island, you'd think this is a high ground position near the edge of zone. There's going to be a ton of people rotating through here, so this will be some easy Storm Surge tags. However, look at who might rotate through here. Firstly, the Craggy team who's already rotated, as that's you. The team who's landed in Heart Lake, who may have either already rotated through here at this point, or will have gone north to try and tag the people in Craggy and rotated through a dead side on the north side of the zone. The Stark team isn't going to rotate through here because they're probably going to rift or use the cars to rotate south towards the zone. And the team at Steamy almost definitely won't rotate through this way either because they're going to go an edge map or down the south of the Stark Island. So you're on this nice high ground position, but no one is actually going to rotate through here for you to actually be able to tag these players. So you need to pick a strategy for this specific zone, for this example, where you would actually be able to get tags, such as using a car or that rift to get you to the closer to the center of the zone, getting up on a hill and still being able to get your Storm Surge tags this way because you're going to be closer to the center and more teams will be rotating around you. Now the teams that we saw already in the FNCS trios were either doing this or they were doing a strategy that I discussed in my last video with Sweaty Sands where they're going to the dead side of the zone and trying to fight people this way. This worked because they knew the rotation and based on the zone that these guys were still going to be in this POI because they had great map awareness and awareness of the POIs around their drop spot, not just their drop spot. This meant that they could go in, pick up Storm Surge tags, maybe even a couple eliminations along the way. Obviously, if it's a really strong team that's landing there, this probably is not the right choice for you because you're going to get clapped by this team, no doubt. If Mongrel, Mitro and Tayson were here, I would not be rotating through them to try and fight these guys. Our next region is Asia, and this was won by RURI, MAUFIN and Bob. These guys drop at an uncontested Dirty Dogs. The thing that stood out to me the most about these guys is their absolutely incredible spacing. And what I mean by that is in the end game, these guys are always next to each other and always there to back each other up if they get into an issue. If someone falls into their box, all three teammates are there to be able to pick up the eliminations and help each other out. And this is exactly what you need in an endgame. This is particularly important when you're in a situation where there's a lot of enemy builds around, you don't have control of all of the walls, floors, cones, whatever it may be, and it's just very likely that someone may edit on you or fall into you. It's so important that all of your teammates are there to help each other out. In this particular game, you can see how close they all are, and they all fall into this box, and they manage to pick up so many eliminations because of it. Now, it's not only just because they can pick up eliminations this way, but it's also because they can help break through builds faster, so they get stuck in zone for less amount of time, meaning they don't waste as much white HP. Means they can chug splash quicker, again, meaning they can heal up their white HP quicker, and you can see Bob make this fantastic crash pad play when he sees there's too many builds in front of him and it's too congested, so he just throws a crash pad at his teammate that pushes them into the zone. Overall, this close spacing will really save this team out and should be something that all trios, duos, squads, whatever it is in a team mode should be implementing when they're in situations that are very, very difficult. If you're split in these kind of situations, the chances are one of your teammates is much more likely for them to get picked off and not be able to do anything in the end game. The NA East region was won by the TNA-TRIO, as I like to call them, of Day, Miro, and Reverse. These guys have a really different playstyle from a lot of the other people who've won of the other regions because these guys just play low ground. But firstly, before we get into that, let's look at their first thing that really stuck out to me while watching them through the qualifiers, heats, and grand finals. These guys, what we'd say, did not have a home. These guys dropped in each qualifier, in the heats, and in the grand finals in completely different spots. They went from Steamy Stacks to Dirty Docks, then in the heat they went down to Fortilla, and then in grand finals they ended up dropping at the west side of the map at Fort Crumpet, Fancy View House, and the hotel. The fact that these guys can play so well in any level of finals, pretty much landing anywhere across the map, is extremely impressive and shows truly how good these guys' playstyle actually is. So when they get to endgame, these guys are not focused on height at all. These guys actually got 0 victory royales and ended up only having, out of 12 games, 2 of these were worse than 8th place, which is incredibly consistent. This is kind of exactly what we talked about where the guys before who were getting a lot of victory royales weren't being as consistent. This is the complete opposite of that. This team was actually so consistent that they didn't even need a victory royale to win the entire tournament. And what these guys did differently is that they played low ground every single endgame. These guys really focused on getting ahead of the zone consistently and just box fighting everyone that was around them when they needed to pick up refreshes, and always kept away from other players as much as possible, conserving their materials as well. This strategy is very consistent because there's not a huge risk involved with taking high ground. When you're trying to take high ground, there's a big fight that can happen, people can shockwave you out, and that just doesn't happen when you're pulling low ground. These guys played it so well, always sticking to dead side, always managing to keep a great layer to themselves, and always giving themselves enough space to box fight between that they didn't even need to get a victory royale to win the tournament. This low ground playstyle is key to their success and something that these guys have been doing very well through all the qualifiers, heats, and grand finals. And I gotta give a shout out to my boy Somebody's Gun, who made this tweet long before the FNCS started saying a low ground team will win FNCS, and he was right on.